A new bill has been proposed in Congress to allow Donald Trump and really Elon Musk to spend less of the money that Congress allocates to the executive branch because they're really on a mission to cut the size of the government.
Right. Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are heading off the Department of Government Efficiency, also known as DOGE, which makes me want to kill myself every time I say that out loud. That was one of the first things Donald Trump announced after he won the election.
Yeah.
And their goal is going to be to try to cut $2 trillion from the national deficit.
Yes.
Now, if you know anything about government, and I mean this, if you know anything, you know that you can't cut $2 trillion from the federal yearly budget.
Yes.
It's literally impossible unless you go after Social Security and Medicare and veterans benefits. Otherwise,
Yes.
It's impossible to do so. It would be the complete elimination of all discretionary spending in the federal government.
Yeah, I don't think even that gets you all the way there.
You're right. You're
Yeah.
right. I don't even think that gets you all. I think that's only like 1.7 trillion.
So you need to eat into the military as well.
Yes. You also need to eat into the military, which is
Yes.
something that Trump has indicated that he has no intention of doing. So anyway, there's basically no way to do this. Another reason there's no way to do this types of cuts that they're looking for, even if they don't get the $2 trillion, say they even want to cut $300 billion. That's still a lot of cuts. Okay. Now, how would they go about doing that? Normally, you need congressional approval and you need Congress to give a budget to the president that has less money appropriated for certain activities.
Yes.
If you want to cut the FDA, okay, Congress says we're not going to give $5 to the FDA, we're going to give $4 to the FDA. All right. Donald Trump wants the authority to earmark that money himself.
Exactly.
He wants the authority to do something what's called impoundment, which is something that was done previously in the country prior to the 1970s. It was done less frequently and less blatantly.
It wasn't done it's been done very unextremely.
Yes, that's
and
the way to put it.
In the 70s, Nixon was trying to consolidate power into the executive branch under himself. And so he was trying to not spend the money that Congress allocated. And as soon as he did that, Congress was like, no, this is not allowed.
Yeah. So in the 1970s, Congress passed a new clean water initiative. And so it delegated a specific amount of money to each municipalities in order to clean up their sewage systems. Nixon was refusing to give all of the money allocated by Congress. And so in response, the municipalities across the country sued the federal government, sued Nixon, and wanted to get that money that Congress appropriated for them.
Yeah.
The Supreme Court ended up ruling in favor of the municipalities, saying that Nixon was improperly using impoundment, specifically citing the new statute that Congress passed in 1974.
No.
Okay.
This is what's interesting.
Okay.
There are two separate things that happened here.
Okay.
There was the case that you're talking about, which only focused on the language of this Clean Water Act. And
You're
basically
right.
it said something like,
You're right.
the quote is like, up to X amount of money does not mean you can spend less than X amount of money.
You're right.
So that's what the Supreme Court ruled with this specific type of phrasing. Concurrently, Congress works on passing a ban on impoundment act, like a new law, so that because they're also not chill with what Nixon is doing. So
Not chill at all.
yes, so both of these ways, they're saying, okay, no, the president has to spend the money that Congress allocated in the way that Congress wanted it to be spent.
The language was does not exceed.
Exactly.
That's what it was. It was does not exceed. So Nixon was saying that gives me the thing, but it doesn't. Point is, so then they passed the Impoundment Act.
Yes.
Okay.
So then that Impoundment Act says basically more broadly that the president has to spend all of the money that Congress allocates for him to spend to do the things that the money is supposed to do.
And that brings us to today, where Senator Mike Lee from Utah is looking to repeal the Impoundment Control Act.
Yes.
Because he wants to give Trump and the executive branch discretionary authority to limit amounts of money going forward in order to accomplish whatever he wants to do from the DOGE initiatives without having to do the tough political fights inside of Congress to make that actually a reality.
Now, the interesting thing is all this would do if this law did pass and ban or repeal that Impoundment Act of 1974, we're just going to see a bigger legal fight about whether Congress really does control the power of the purse.
Which it says in the section that describes the role of the legislative branch of the Constitution. It says it has the power of the purse.
Exactly.
So what does that power mean if the president can decide, no, I'm going to ignore the dollars in which you've allocated to specific things?
Yes.
Now, this isn't the first time that Trump is looking to go around or utilize this impoundment power. During the first administration, he was impeached over it, basically. Yes, he was impeached over it because he was refusing to give specific weapons and /money/dollars to Ukraine for a specific political reason.
For information on Hunter Biden. And so by impounding that money and not giving it out to Ukraine, he was breaking the Impoundment Control Act. Yes.
And that was the whole thing. So now he's looking to consolidate that power in the executive branch, which again, it would just weaken Congress completely.
Yes. Well, and then I think you would get a case that says, no, Congress has the power of the purse. The president has to spend that money. And then we would get a new Supreme Court ruling that's like, what language specifically, like maybe cannot exceed, maybe they use a different phrase in the bill, or some bills have a phrase that isn't cannot exceed.
Like I imagine a future where Democrats in Congress write into each one of their budget lines saying does not exceed, right? Or has to be this exactly, or whatever.
Or like at least. It's
or
the
at
opposite.
least, whatever.
Yeah, it does not exceed, so it matches the precedent.
Yes.
Or saying, yeah, he has to spend this much money.
And you have to say it explicitly in each line, whereas Republican budgets may not include that phrasing in order to give the president that impoundment power if the ICA, the Impoundment Control Act, ends up getting repealed.
Now, okay, I want to zoom out.
We just got real technical and really boring.
Yeah, and I also am worried we might be getting buried in partisanship and like the battling.
Okay.
Government efficiency as a concept. Not a bad thing.
Love it.
We want the government to be efficient.
Absolutely.
So doesn't that mean that generally like it makes sense to just want the government to set an objective and to think, oh yeah, we just want you to achieve this objective. We don't need you to spend X amount of money doing it if you can spend less money doing it.
The ICA has a carve out for that.
Okay.
The Impoundment Control Act does say that if the executive branch can justify it based off an efficiency standard, and then it's good. There is that written into that language.
Sure. But okay, so then that makes sense because it means that if you're coming up short in any way in trying to achieve the measure, then you need to spend that money.
Exactly.
To try to finish it out.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. But especially when it comes to programs, like if we look at like Head Start programs, right? That's all about, getting access for childcare to kids. That's something that money is then diluted to like local governments to then handle.
Yes.
And so then that money getting diluted, I guess this is an interesting question now, because how do we determine whether or not that is efficiently used or not? Well, that seems like a policy question, not a spending question from the executive.
Okay. What's interesting is part of the law that passed the Impoundment Act also created the Congressional Budget Office. So maybe there's a mechanism for that for the budget office to help set like kind of a standard as far as the efficient use of those funds, including if they're dispersed to the state and the local level.
I see. I want to zoom out again because we just did the thing where we zoomed in too close. Now let's zoom out again. Do we think that any part of this government efficiency push is coming from a place of virtue? Do we think any of it is merited? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I definitely think it's merited. I mean, we've talked about this 100 times, but the debt is bad.
Yeah, debt's
paying 18% of our intake of our revenue
sucks.
That we get on interest is bad. So even like from a very basic point, yes, there is some virtue in trying to pay down the debt so we don't have to do that, right?
Yes.
So there's obviously there's a cost benefit analysis going on, and there are benefits to cutting the government.
Yes, there are benefits to cutting the government if you do it specific ways and you can find inefficiencies, right?
It's just a matter of whether they outweigh the costs,
right?
And that's where we are usually probably thinking probably not.
And another thing is I don't want to give the president that much discretionary power, because then they could just like defund the EPA off of their whim without having to go through congressional approval, right?
Yes.
Which is a problem. We don't want the executive to have that power. Even if we might indicate that there may be inefficiencies going on, do we want the executive branch to hold the control of that, or do we want that to be a policy question handled by our representatives?
Okay, I guess. Well, it comes down to the structure of government, because part of what they say with the idea of shutting down the Department of Education again is like distributing those powers or those responsibilities
To different branches.
or different places of the federal government
Yeah.
will be able to achieve the goals for less money. And so that's why it's hard with, like, do we think that there should be an EPA just because Congress said there's an EPA? There should be an EPA? Or should there be an EPA because that's the best organizational structure we have figured out to handle the problems that the EPA is supposed to handle?
Yeah. I also maybe I do want to give some credit to the conservative idea that some type of consolidation may be beneficial, right? I think that there are avenues that you can go down to have a larger conversation, that like a multi-year conversation, and maybe Doge actually may be a part of this, about a restructure of the federal government. And if you can restructure in a way that is more efficient, I'm fine with that, and I'm fine exploring that idea.
Yeah.
I don't know if I trust the administration's. That's maybe
well
right?
I think they're hard to trust because, like you kind of kicked this segment off with, the size of cuts that they're talking about cannot happen without cuts to entitlement programs and the military.
Yeah.
And because there's been signals that are explicitly against cuts to either of those, it certainly seems like something here has to be fishy, right? So it makes sense to be skeptical of what they're getting at.
I agree.